So as we started talking about alternatives, it crossed my mind that, you know, the favorite buzzword these days is innovative finance. Every newspaper article, World Bank event, UN circles, everyone's looking for the new hot innovative finance tool. But the reality is, we don't really need new tools. We know what works. We know that command and control and all of the pieces that traditionally fit into that work. We know that governments need to be brave enough to actually set strong pollution limits and then do the mandatory work of funding enforcement. So with that as an overarching principle, Daniel Moss from Our Water Commons is going to talk about using a commons structure for natural resource protection, and then I'll talk about public-public partnerships as the alternative to public-private partnerships. Take it away, Daniel.
Okay, great. Can you folks hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon. So sorry I'm not there with you to join you face-to-face, but I'm really pleased to be here by the phone. So yeah, I just want to talk briefly on exactly what Darcy laid out. I've been hearing about the really troubling characterizations of the financialization of nature, and I'm trying, without being Pollyannish, I'm going to describe a couple of imperfect systems. And these are systems that would, what's the name of my presentation there, I don't know if you have a slide in front of you, Noel, is paying for ecosystem services without financializing nature. So I work with a group called Our Water Commons, which is a project on the commons. So quickly, why is nature financialized? Well, we've heard a lot already about the private sector and government seeking to reap some kind of financial gain from natural resources. That's obvious, that's going on. The second thing that's also obvious, but it's kind of lost in the first one, is that there are expenses. There are costs to environmental services, both short-term cleanup costs and long-term protection costs, including climate change mitigation, which are important public services. So we're faced with that question of how to pay for these services without getting into these very frightening markets that we're inventing here. So I think it's pretty clear from the work of all of you and all that we're resisting the first and we're proposing solutions for the second. And so I want to touch briefly on two examples that I've looked at a little bit. One in more depth is the New York City water system for potable water and a Brazilian consortium of watershed committees and intermunicipality consortium. So in New York, just real quick, the crisis that New York City faced in terms of its water quality was that there's a lot of encroachment from suburbanization. New York City, since the 1800s, has been obtaining its water from upstate, from a few watersheds, and the suburbanization was causing a lot of compromise of the water quality, as well as increased agribusiness that was creating a lot of pollutants, point sources of pollution into the watershed. So they were kind of on a threshold of deciding whether they ought to filter the water. They were able to, for the most part, have unfiltered water, invest in large infrastructure, or work with the farmers to change farming practices upstate. Fifth slide, Noel. So that's the situation that they faced. One of the watersheds became quite compromised, Croton, not too far from the city, and they were faced with how to deal with the upstate, further upstate watersheds. So sixth slide, Noel. So we had a new administrator come in, and Albert Appleton, and Darcy mentioned command and control. He took a look at the situation and very quickly decided that the best policy would be what you see at the bottom, which is a good environment will produce good water. So rather than build a filtration plant, he wanted to opt, first and foremost, to making sure that the water source itself was clean. So he proposed a new way of solving the city's water woes, which was to preserve the Catskill environment. Seventh slide. The New York City, in order to preserve their pristine water, did a couple of things. One is they made them up a bunch of land in order to protect sensitive wetlands and important pieces of land in the watershed. But they really needed to work with the farmers in order that they wouldn't be polluting the watershed. Eighth slide. So what they did is they set up a farmer-friendly watershed protection program, which they called whole farm planning. And what's important here is we don't have time to get into the details, is the way that they conducted this program design, which wasn't a design of the New York City Water Authority, but rather was a co-design, or really a design of the farmers upstate. Basically, the New York City Water Authority said to the farmers, here's what we need. We need clean water. What do you need? Well, they said, well, we need to be able to preserve our livelihoods. And they tried to find a way to make that work. And basically what ended up happening, and you can go to the next slide, no, the ninth, is that the city would pay for the operating capital costs of pollution control. So in other words, each farm needed to go through some kind of business shift about how they control, these are largely dairy operations, so they needed to control the waste from the cattle, from the dairy cows. So they created a watershed agricultural council, and they created a self-governing mechanism among the farmers to control the pollution flows. And this was financed largely out of the operating costs of the water authority from New York City, and they folded the operating costs of this watershed protection into the tariffs, which, when they did the math, was far less expensive than building infiltration plants. So just a quick lesson is that the solution that they came up with had to work for both the ecosystem, in other words, the purity of the water, and for the humans, for the farmers that were working in the watershed. It needed to be an integrated solution. It needed to be urban, rural, water, and land use. In other words, it couldn't strictly be about water. We needed to look at how the land was being used. And it needed to deal with sanitation as well as potable water and irrigation, so it was a real integrated solution. The real partnership was that it wasn't it was a real co-production between the water authority and the farmers. And the thing was that it broke through narrow institutional barriers. I was just recently at the World Water Forum and BAME in France. You see how dispersed water is among very many government agencies, Ministry of Public Health or Commerce or Energy. And so the important thing is that they were able to stay on task and work towards the purity of the New York City water and galvanize the other institutions that needed to coalesce around that. They need to look at this as a creation of wealth for the common good and then come up with long-term public financing and investment to make it happen. And then, as I said earlier, they needed to fold the costs in a sustainable way into the operating costs. And in a certain way, they were guided by common principles, although they weren't explicitly doing that. But if you look at, and our work involves a lot around looking at how the writings, the principles of common pool management are applied to managing common resources like water. So next slide would be their 11. Brazil, just to say that they were very much influenced by this, and we don't have time to get into it, but what they were trying to do is figure out ways to largely come up with a public fund to invest in municipal wastewater treatment. So they had a great problem with waste from cities being introduced into the watershed. What they were able to do is have a very active participatory debate in watershed committees in these three rivers, come up with a plan to mostly increase tariffs to hydroelectric plants, make it more expensive for them to use the water, and those revenues, the additional revenue beyond the cost of water delivery, would be used to set up a grant fund that would be accessible to municipalities to build infrastructure for wastewater treatment. And just some discussion questions I just listed here. Maybe we can get into this in this last part here. So there's a lot of opportunities for us in this kind of work. One is we can support municipal and state governments in financing public services and environmental improvements. Food and Water Watch has been really active in trying to set up an infrastructure trust fund. This could be for the United States or this could be globally. We have the opportunity to support rural livelihoods. We have the chance to really talk about fair and subsidized block tariff pricing. And we can set up this as a learning agenda for the movement. As I said, these are really imperfect cases. There's a lot of troubling aspects of them as well, but maybe we could sort of dissect them a little bit and figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. Some of the threats here is, really the question about where the money comes from to pay for these expensive environmental improvements. There's been a lot of good advocacy work opposing RED, where you're over there in D.C. now working on the World Bank's poor policies. And, a lot of the danger here is about commodifying rural labor and turning farmers into forest rangers and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of things that really need to be thought through. And then on the other hand, there are ways to generate funds for this that could be, in some cases, depending on the user's abilities. You could come up with funds from water users, for example, especially if you have kind of a progressive black tariff pricing. The other thing that, this really involves us.
Hey, Daniel. Sorry.
Thanks, Daniel. I had no subtle way to tell you that your time was up.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I figured that might happen. Okay, so just to say that this is an important debate. It's a big debate, and there's a lot of opinions in the movement about it. And so I just sort of end with that note about dividing the movement. That I think that it's a point on which there's strong opinions about whether we ought to go this route of getting into the question of financing ecosystem services or not. So maybe we can have that discussion.